welcome Christina Rees onto the stage. Christina Rees, CBE, is someone whom we are absolutely thrilled to have with us. Christina was awarded her Commander of the British Empire Medal for, and on behalf of, the amazing work that was done to bring Anglican women into priestly ministry. And they have been so supportive of us all along. And I myself have benefited personally so much from Christina's wisdom, advice, and unfailing support. She's a writer, a broadcaster, a practical theologian, and she specialises in women and religion. She is, as I've just said, or was a leading campaigner and spokeswoman for women bishops. For women bishops? And she was chair of Watch, Women in the Church, for over 13 years. She was a lay member of the Church of England's General Synod for 25 years and a founder member of the Archbishops' Council, the body that advises the Archbishops of Canterbury and York on matters of policy and resources. She has sat on numerous national church committees and is an honorary fellow of Ripon College, Cuddesdon, a leading Anglican theological college. In 2016, she was made CBE for her services to the Church of England. She's a school chaplain, and this was news to me, but I'm so delighted to hear it. Christina, you will be ordained later this month. Yes. And we are thrilled to hear it. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all, and thank you for your warm welcome. How does it feel to be making history? I hope it feels quite exciting and maybe a little scary, but absolutely just right, because that's what you're doing. And by holding this root and branch synod, and by meeting with people all over the world who feel the same way you do about the need for reform in the Catholic Church, this is going to make history. And I wasn't here for Mary McAleese's talk yesterday, but I gather what she said lit a particular torch. And that torch, I believe, will carry on burning until certain reforms are made. Now, we meet on a horrendous anniversary of 9/11. And what a sad thing to remember for the people involved, and the ripple effect to all their families and the shock waves it sent out, not just to people in America, but all over the world. Such a violent act of hatred and rejection, and some of it we know, political ideology and various reasons, but also the implication of certain religious beliefs that stand in opposition to everything in the West. And of course, in our understanding, there can be nothing like that, no violence, no hatred, no cruelty like that in our understanding of what religion is about, of what our faith is about, of what we do and think and say in the name of Christ. So with that as the backdrop, this synod is being held, so exciting, and stands for something completely different. And the group is growing. Now, in the few minutes I have, there's so much to say about the way forward. And what I'd like to do in this time is just to to talk about some of the things I learned along the way in the campaigning years. And the campaign for women priests in the Church of England took over 100 years. And it really wasn't a sustained campaign, but as early as 1920, the issue of women's ordination was put on the Lambeth Conference agenda. And the Lambeth Conference is a once-a-decade conference of all the bishops in the Anglican Communion. And of course, the idea was rejected in 1920, came back in 1930, it was rejected. In 1935, the Archbishop had a special commission assigned, and learned theological men met and found that they couldn't possibly ordain women for the reasons, and I paraphrase, they did not believe, this is their theological reasoning, they did not believe that the average male member of a congregation could be present at a service at which a woman presided, and the words were, without becoming unduly conscious of her sex. Well, translation, I might fancy the vicar. And this was the theological reasoning, and one of the things that struck me so vividly when I first heard it is, of course, the androcentric position that was taken, because for some reason, for many hundreds of years, women have sat, average members, women, members of congregations, many thousands and millions of congregations have sat, and somehow managed to restrain themselves from... So it says a lot. But then history took its course, and on the 24th of January 1944, Florence Lee Timoy was ordained in Hong Kong by the then Bishop R.O. Hall, an Englishman, who took a bold, brave decision to ordain her as a priest in the Church of God, because she was already a deaconess, she was needed, priests were needed, it was at the end of World War II, and he did it. And then he wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury telling him what he'd done. And the Archbishop wrote back saying, well, I can't possibly condone it, but I send you both my blessings. So much more about the history there. But the next ordinations in the Anglican Church took place also in Hong Kong in 1971, then some irregular ordinations in America in 74 that were ratified officially in 76. And then, of course, it wasn't until 1992 that the Church of England voted yes, and the first ordinations of the first 1,500 women deacons who'd been waiting, they were ordained in 1994. The first ordinations took place on the 12th of March, 1994 in Bristol Cathedral. And then Bishop Barry Rogerson was the man who got his dates in first, so absolutely wonderful history. But we did have to wait another 20 years before we got women bishops. And at the time of the General Synod vote for women priests, our Roman Catholic observer basically said, we would never have done it like this. If the principle is right to ordain women, we would have started with bishops, because authority flows from the bishops. It's not some incremental working up and trying it and, ooh, does it feel all right? It's, is this the right thing to do, or is it not? If it is, then do it completely. One little hiccup, a year after the vote went through and before the first ordinations, there was an act of synod passed in synod, making provision for those who remained opposed in an attempt to keep everyone together, to allow everyone to stay part of the Anglican family. And what was created were provincial Episcopal visitors who would extend, 3 of them, to extend Episcopal ministry to the congregations and people who could not accept the ministrations, not only of women, but of the priests and bishops who support women, and particularly the bishops who had laid hands on women, who would go on to ordain women as priests. And so there grew this we called it a theology of taint, where it's not just the women, but actually the very completely, officially and well-prepared and ordained men who suddenly became unacceptable because their hands had been laid on women. So again, our Roman Catholic visitors said, no, if we'd ordained women as priests, we would not have created a separate strand of the episcopacy to deal with those who remain opposed. And we all know about the ordinariate, which is the space carved out within the Catholic Church for Anglicans who want to become Catholics about the matter over women's ordination. We could go on that for many times, but I really would like to end with a scamper through some what I hope will be very practical tips for all the root and branchers and associated groups around the world about running campaigns and changing opinion and basically taking on tradition, hierarchy, and patriarchy. So, a small task. I think one of the questions we asked from the beginning was, who is benefiting from the status quo? Identify the groups who are benefiting. And it may not be necessarily only the obvious ones. There are the obvious ones, but there are also some other groups and people involved who, with these changes, will become threatened and upset. And you may not have assumed that they would be in that group. You might have assumed they might actually be allies. But just become aware how their lives would be disrupted if this were to change. Now, the vision. The most important thing possible is, we know this, not to be just against something, but what are you for? What are you for? And what difference will it make? So present an alternative vision and paint the picture of what that looks like. And if you can do that and communicate that with enthusiasm, with joy, people are going to want to be part of this journey. And start with theology. You know, I love the idea that both Helena Kennedy, who we'll be hearing from, and Mary McAleese talked about the human rights of so much of the changes desired. That's so very important. But for some reason, a lot of good Christian people seem to think that human rights are something different and other than what Christians should be supporting and caring about. And so I think it's really important to link in all the human rights with the underlying theology, so that where did the concept of justice start? Where did that come from? And just be able to embed that in our theology. And give people the tools to do their own theology about this, their own theology about why it might be good to have married clergy, why it might be good to have women included, why it might be good to be inclusive with the lesbian, gay, Christian community. give them the opportunity, why it might be good to change certain canon laws instead of a threatening, damaging thing. Also, find your allies at all levels, not only parishioners, priests, and bishops, and please God, one of these days soon, a bishop and then another will start to say positive things, put their heads above the parapets, and then others will say, I can say that too, I believe that too, and prominent people. But don't just look within the church. How about people in other walks of life and in public life? Their voices have weight. If they are someone who is known for their integrity, their honesty, their dedication to what they're working on, and if they could say something positive about reform in the Catholic Church and how important that would be, get your allies everywhere. And then, sort of a fun idea, there will always be the groups who say, let's just go slowly, let's just work steadily, let's not rock the boat too much, bring people with us, be the voice of reason, sweet reason. And then there are always the groups on the edges going, no, let's run forward and storm the palace or whatever. Guess what? We need both. You need both. And so let the more moderate ones speak with the moderate voice. Be absolutely in touch with and work in concert with the slightly more radicals, because you need them and they need you, and it's possible to work together and say, well, we'd like to say this, but we just think that might be a bit too much. How about you say that? And then we can go, oh, that sounds so radical, but what we'd like to say and what I think they're intending, we can do this. And so together you can actually get further. So work with each other. Don't put each other down. Don't put each other down. We all need each other. Let's model the inclusivity that we've been talking about and that we long to see, and work with our brothers and sisters, and the ones with the prickly edges are as desperately needed as the ones that just seem to pour beautiful, soothing oil over everything. Now I've got 4 L's coming up. Campaigns need 4 L's. Letters, whether it's to the Pope or your MP or whatever. Lunches. Take people out to lunch. And then it's so easy to say, do you know, we were thinking if you were to write this or say that, or perhaps try that, that would work. Leaflets. Just a quick, easy thing. Some people need something to hold on to remind them, to just spell out the basics so that people are clear and can have enough in there themselves so that they're not the experts, but it'll help them to go forward. And of course, lectures. And here we are at a synod where there are many, many speakers. So those are my 4 L's that cover, of course, a very broad range of activity. And in the run-up to the vote for women bishops, I cannot say how many hours I spent, not just doing broadcasts on radio and television, writing articles and doing interviews and doing public lectures, but hours and hours and hours behind the scenes, speaking with producers and presenters and editors, and explaining what was important, who's who, what has to happen, canon law, and the process. And that paid off because we got more and more increasingly intelligent media coverage. And also they felt informed, so really important. And then I would like to say something that You know, we talk about changing heads and hearts, affecting heads and hearts. But in the campaign, I discovered something new. I discovered that instead of 2, there were 3 loci of changes that take place in people. And that is heads, hearts, and gut. And the head's the easiest to change. You know, someone can say, yes, conceptually, intellectually, I completely agree with you. Of course it doesn't make sense not to blah, 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 blah. But somewhere in their heart, they were brought up and they're thinking of an old friend who would be devastated if these changes took place. So the head has to be changed. The head has to be changed. Information, facts, stories. The heart has to be changed. And counter what will be in people's hearts, what they will have as part of their formation, their growing up. Father so-and-so, that wonderful cardinal so-and-so, who would be just so devastated if this were to happen. So replace them with the stories and anecdotes of all the people you know who long to fulfill their vocation, who have known themselves called since they were very young, who this, who that, who whatever. The horrible decisions that some priests have had to make between marriage and becoming ordained. And then so many other things. The agenda is broad. But bring together the stories to affect people's hearts, the heads and the hearts. And then there's the gut. It was in General Synod one day when we were voting. It was part of the debates on women bishops. And a bishop stood up and he started saying, yes, of course, this will be wonderful, and yes, these many fine women who've been ministering for years, they'll make wonderful bishops, etc., etc. But that was the head. Then he went into his heart, and he started talking about, but I'm thinking, and it was a friend of his who was a priest, an older man, who would have to leave the church if women became bishops. And he said, but I cannot square this with my friend, Father so-and-so. And he almost started to cry, weep with sadness, thinking about his one friend who would have to leave the church because all these women might become bishops and take senior positions. And then there was another shifting. And he went into his gut. And he started not just crying, but shouting and with rage about, and how dare we take this step? How dare we take this step? When so many people have given their lives in decades of service, so many fine men, and they will not be able to stay in the church. And I suddenly got it. Eureka. Head, heart, gut. His head had been converted. His heart was sort of. His gut was absolutely unmovable. He could not stand the thought, in the end, of women bishops. Remember those 3 places. And then I'd like to end with just a little throw something out about the vision. So the miracle has happened. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What difference does it make in your life? Try to internalize that. Breathe it, live it, dream about it, imagine it, and spread that energy and that joy. Because if you can see what things will be like when the miracle has happened, so can they. And last but not least, what more would you attempt if you knew you could not fail? Thank you.